fall to cancer, and their families fall to cancer just like everyone else. So obviously, if they knew or felt that this was an effective treatment, they would be using it, and they're not. In fact, the average doctor has a higher cancer rate than anybody else, any other occupation you can imagine, except possibly somebody working constantly around X-ray equipment. So we know that this is not a conspiracy to kill people. It does mean that vested interests have captured our medical system and caused it to be biased in favor of drugs. It does mean that the bias has been written into our laws and now prevents you and me from having freedom of choice to seek alternative cancer therapies. It does mean that those who have done this are also victims of their own bias, and it most assuredly means that we had better do something about it. With that, I'll close it off, and if there is time for questions, I'd be happy to do so. Thank you for listening to me. The question was, do I feel that the creation of the pharmaceutical industry is pretty much the same as the creation of the Federal Reserve System? And the answer is no. Because the Federal Reserve System was created specifically as a cartel. It started out to do exactly what it is now doing. It was conceived that way, whereas the pharmaceutical industry rather grew over a period of decades and became that. Now, the important thing is that they both are today the same thing. But they weren't conceived that way, in my view. But they both today are cartels, and they both have the power of government behind them, because they've had, the cartel members have had a lot of political influence and have been able to literally buy legislation which gives favoritism to the members of the cartel. So it's a marriage between the commercial interests in the cartel and government interests. And it's really bad for America. Does Laetrile exist in other foods other than apricot seeds and apple seeds? Yes. In fact, it exists in about 1,400 edible plants. They're ubiquitous in nature, but as I mentioned before, modern man is selected against all of them. Now, grasses are a very common source of amygdalin. All the broad grasses, the tunis grass, the arrowgrass, and the broad leaf grasses are particularly rich. I think wheatgrass has a little bit in it, not as much as some of the broad grasses. But it's one of the clues in the early days of this was the fact that farmers in the Midwest would notice that during the wintertime their cattle would develop what they call winter cancers, the cancers of the ear or the tongue or something, and they'd go away in the spring. And they couldn't understand this. And they noticed that they start going away just about the time that the snow began to melt and the first grasses came up through the snow. And when the cows started to eat those grasses, the tumors would go away. And that was a clue, you see. Yes, it's in about 1,400 edible plants. I'm glad you phrased it as a philosophical question. I guess that's really what it is. I think human nature has two sides to it. And I think that when you have a political system or a social system which allows power to be concentrated into the hands of people without being responsible for that power, it tends to corrupt them. It tends to bring out that negative side of their human nature. That's the reason I am a firm advocate of individualism as opposed to collectivism. Individualism places responsibility on the individual, and the collectivism, of course, places all responsibility and power on the group, which translates into somebody representing the group, which translates the strong leader, and so forth. We have all the various forms of collectivism, which are communism, Nazism, fascism. All of these isms are merely variants of collectivism. Anybody that's given power, whether the power is derived by conquest of arms, which was the old-fashioned way, or whether it's derived by consent of the governed through elections and propaganda and economic pressures and rewards and so forth, which is the new way, either way, when power concentrates into the hands of a few people or one man, it's a very corrupting influence. I don't think we can ever look for a system where we have to say, I hope we only get good men in there. I think we have to follow Jefferson's advice and look for bad men, or not look for them, but anticipate that they will be there. If you remember, Jefferson received a letter from one of his constituents, and he said, Mr. Jefferson, this is right after the Constitution had been drafted, he said, how can we be sure that only good men will be elected to government? And Jefferson's answer was irate. He said, speak to me not of good men. Rather, let us bind men down with the chains of the Constitution. The message was clear, that you have to count on scoundrels gravitating into political office. Don't build a system that requires only good men and saints to be there, because you've made a huge mistake if you do that. So I'm getting finally to your answer. My philosophical answer to your question is, I think all people are susceptible of being corrupted by power. And therefore, our solution is not just to find new people to replace the ones that have the power, but to redesign the system and put it back to the roots that we had in this country, a constitutional republic with limited powers in the government. If we can do that, then these people will still be there, but they won't have any ability to do as much damage as they have. Electronic voting is a terrible idea because there are so many ways for it to be rigged, and the average person would never have any idea. Even a computer programmer wouldn't know if an election was being rigged under the system that's being developed right now. Yes, we produced a documentary film on that. It's called Invisible Ballots, and you can find the easiest way is to come to our website at Reality Zone. The Reality Zone is our commercial site where we sell books and video recordings and things like that. So it's www.realityzone.com. And you'll find the books that I'm talking about today. You'll find my book, Creature from Jekyll Island. You'll find the Invisible Ballots video, and about 100 other titles on topics relating to this. I don't think that spreading the word by itself is sufficient. I think that's one of the problems that we have had, and one of the errors I have made myself over my career in this field. For many years, I used to think that all we had to do was spread the word, sound the alarm, let people know, and somehow this would all go away. We just write letters to our congressmen, the people who have put us in this mess, and say, won't you please follow the rules? I actually believe that that was it. Now I've come fairly recently to a conclusion that that's necessary, but by itself, it's not going to accomplish any more results than we have already accomplished in the last 40-some years that I've been in the battle. What is the missing piece of the puzzle is the fact that we have never had the concept of coming to power. We've never had the concept of putting ourselves in the positions where we make the decisions. Instead of having to petition somebody who makes the decisions to do what we want, we've never thought that we should be in those positions. That was an idea that was totally alien. Most of us think, well, you know, politics is dirty, we don't want any part of that.